They think silence means nothing is happening. They think absence is weakness. But what they don't understand is this: when someone loses access to you, the first thing they lose is control. They don't feel it immediately. At first, there's confidence, pride, ego. They say she'll come back, but time has a way of exposing truth because absence isn't empty. When you are present, people often don't see you clearly. They see what you provide. Your consistency becomes background noise. Your effort turns into expectation. Your forgiveness becomes permission. While you're there, illusions thrive. They believe you'll always adjust, always understand, always stay. They confuse your patience for weakness and your loyalty for obligation. Not because they are cruel, because familiarity breeds blindness. Presence cushions reality. It allows people to live comfortably inside assumptions, telling themselves stories like, "This won't change," or "She's not going anywhere." As long as you're there, those illusions feel safe. The moment you step away, the illusions lose oxygen. Suddenly, there's no proof to support the story they've been telling themselves. No reassurance, no emotional labor smoothing the edges, no familiar voice validating their choices. Absence doesn't attack them. It simply removes the cover. And without that cover, reality becomes unavoidable. They realize how much of the connection depended on you showing up, initiating, forgiving, holding space. What once felt automatic now feels fragile. What once felt secure now feels uncertain. Illusions can't survive silence because silence doesn't lie. At first, the mind tries to protect itself. It downplays your absence. It minimizes your importance. It replaces reflection with distraction. They tell themselves you're replaceable, that nothing has really changed. But illusion is fragile. It requires reinforcement. And every day you don't return, don't explain, don't chase, that reinforcement disappears. The cracks widen. Small moments start to feel unfamiliar. Routine feels hollow. The absence isn't just about missing you. It's about missing how things worked when you were there. That's when the illusion begins to collapse under its own weight. As time stretches on, the truth becomes clearer and more uncomfortable. They start noticing patterns they ignored before. How you were the one who made peace possible. How you brought stability into chaos. How you softened hard moments without asking for credit. The illusion that they were fine without you weakens as they face the imbalance you quietly carried. They remember details they once overlooked. They hear your words differently now, not because you've changed them, but because absence has stripped away the noise that kept them from listening. And here's the most powerful part. You don't have to explain any of this. You don't need to defend your worth or clarify your intentions. Absence does that work for you. It reveals the truth more honestly than any argument ever could. Illusions collapse not through confrontation, but through clarity. And clarity arrives when what was once constant is no longer available. What remains is raw understanding, uncomfortable, undeniable, and impossible to ignore. Silence is uncomfortable because it removes escape routes. When words stop, explanations end, and access is gone, the mind has nowhere to hide. Noise is how people avoid accountability. Talking, arguing, justifying, distracting. Silence takes all of that away. It doesn't accuse. It doesn't chase. It doesn't explain. It simply exists. And in that stillness, reflection becomes unavoidable. When you are no longer speaking, no longer reacting, no longer softening the truth, the weight of unspoken thoughts begins to surface. At first, silence feels temporary to them. They assume it's a pause, not a decision. They expect the familiar rhythm to resume, the check in, the message, the emotional availability. But as silence stretches, it changes shape. It becomes louder than words ever were. It shows up in the quiet moments when distractions fail, late nights, long drives, early mornings. That's when the mind starts replaying what was said, what wasn't said, what should have been handled differently. Silence turns memory into a mirror, and people are forced to see themselves without filters. Reflection doesn't happen all at once. It arrives in layers. At first, they reflect on you, your absence, your distance, your choice to disengage. Then slowly, the focus shifts inward. They start questioning their actions, their tone, their assumptions. They revisit moments they once dismissed, not because you demanded accountability, but because silence demanded honesty. Without your voice guiding the narrative, they are left to confront their own. And that's where discomfort begins, because self-reflection rarely aligns with the story people tell themselves about who they are. Silence also removes emotional regulation. When you were present, you may have been the one calming storms, offering reassurance, translating feelings into understanding. Without that support, emotions don't settle as easily. Frustration lingers longer. Guilt surfaces unexpectedly. Regret finds space to breathe. Silence doesn't soothe, it exposes. It brings unresolved feelings to the surface and forces them to sit with emotions they once handed off to you. And that emotional weight becomes harder to ignore the longer the silence remains unbroken. Over time, silence rewires perspective. They begin to recognize how often you were the bridge between conflict and peace, chaos and clarity, reaction and response. They reflect on how much effort you invested quietly without keeping score. In silence, they start to see patterns, how you adapted, how you compromised, how you stayed when it wasn't easy. These realizations don't come from longing alone, they come from comparison. Life without your presence feels different, heavier, less balanced. Silence sharpens contrast, and contrast reveals truth. And the most unsettling part of silence is that it offers no reassurance. There's no confirmation that forgiveness is coming, no signal that access will be restored. That uncertainty keeps reflection active. The mind keeps searching, replaying, reevaluating. Silence doesn't rush healing or resolution. It slows everything down so reality can be fully processed. It teaches a lesson without raising its voice. It forces growth not through pressure, but through absence. And once reflection begins at this level, it cannot be undone or ignored. Regret doesn't arrive all at once. It starts quietly, almost unnoticeable, hiding behind confidence and distraction. In the beginning, time feels generous. They believe there's still room to fix things, to explain later, to reach out when it's convenient. They tell themselves nothing is permanent yet. That mindset is comforting because it delays responsibility. As long as time feels open, regret stays dormant. It waits patiently, allowing pride to speak louder than truth. But time doesn't stay neutral. Every passing day adds weight. What once felt like space begins to feel like distance. The absence that was easy to ignore becomes harder to justify. Small moments start triggering memory, songs, places, routines, shared habits. Each reminder adds another layer. Regret grows not because of one big realization, but because of many small ones stacking quietly on top of each other. Time gives regret depth. It allows it to mature, to become more personal, more specific, more real. As time stretches on, opportunities close. Conversations that could have happened no longer feel appropriate. Apologies that could have been simple now feel heavy. What once required honesty now demands courage. Time turns hesitation into loss. The longer they wait, the more they realize that silence wasn't just a pause. It was a decision with consequences. Regret intensifies when they understand that moments passed while they assumed there would always be another chance. Time also sharpens perspective. Distance creates clarity that presence never allowed. They start seeing situations without emotion blurring judgment. They recognize patterns. How often you were patient, how often you gave grace, how often you chose peace over being right. Time removes the urgency of ego and replaces it with the honesty of reflection. And with that clarity comes regret, because they can no longer hide behind misunderstanding or confusion. The truth becomes undeniable when time strips away excuses. There's also the realization that you didn't freeze in place while time moved, while they were thinking, waiting, assuming. You were changing, growing, healing, building a life that no longer revolves around their uncertainty. Time reveals that your absence wasn't empty, it was active. And that awareness deepens regret, because they see that what was lost wasn't just a person, but a version of connection that can't be recreated. Eventually, regret settles into the understanding that timing matters, that love, respect, and effort have windows, miss them, and the cost isn't dramatic, it's permanent. Time doesn't punish loudly. It teaches quietly, consistently, without mercy. And when regret finally fully forms, it's no longer about what happened. It's about what didn't, the words not spoken, the effort not made, the value not recognized when it was still within reach. Power is often misunderstood as control over someone else, but real power begins the moment you stop needing validation. When you step away, something shifts quietly but decisively. The dynamic that once relied on your availability, your understanding, your willingness to adjust begins to dissolve. While they may still believe the balance remains unchanged, growth is already happening on your side. And growth, unlike emotion, doesn't announce itself. It shows up in choices, boundaries, and the absence of reaction. As you grow, your focus moves inward. Energy once spent explaining, proving, or accommodating is redirected toward building stability within yourself. You learn how to sit with discomfort instead of chasing resolution. You begin trusting your judgment instead of seeking permission. This internal shift is subtle, but it alters everything. The dynamic changes because you no longer operate from the same emotional position. What once felt urgent now feels optional. What once held power over your mood no longer does. Meanwhile, the other side often remains fixed in the old version of you, the one who responded quickly, cared deeply, and filled in emotional gaps. They expect the same access, the same influence, the same leverage. But growth creates distance from expectation. You're no longer playing the same role, and that's where the imbalance becomes visible. They sense the shift before they understand it. Conversations feel different. Responses are fewer, calmer, more deliberate. The control they once assumed begins to slip, not because you took it from them, but because you outgrew it. Growth also brings discernment. You start recognizing patterns instead of reacting to moments. You see how dynamics formed, why certain behaviors were tolerated, and what you were subconsciously trading for connection. With that awareness, you stop negotiating your worth. The power dynamic changes because you no longer accept situations that require self-abandonment. You become less predictable, not out of strategy, but out of self-respect. And unpredictability born from growth is unsettling to those who relied on your consistency for comfort. There's also a quiet confidence that develops when you realize you can survive without what you once feared losing. That confidence isn't loud or performative. It's steady. It shows in how you move through life without urgency or explanation. The need to be understood fades. The need to be chosen disappears. And when those needs dissolve, so does the leverage anyone had over you. Power shifts naturally to the person who is no longer afraid of walking away. Over time, this new dynamic becomes undeniable. They feel it in the lack of emotional pull, in the absence of reaction, in the way your life continues without interruption. Growth doesn't punish or seek revenge. It simply repositions you. And in doing so, it changes the entire balance of influence. Not because you demanded power, but because you became self-sufficient enough to no longer give it away. Clarity rarely comes while something is still within reach. When access feels guaranteed, perception stays blurred by comfort and assumption. Loss interrupts that comfort. It removes the safety net that allowed effort to be delayed and appreciation to be postponed. Only when something is gone does the mind begin to separate what was real from what was taken for granted. Loss doesn't exaggerate value. It reveals it. It strips away distractions and forces focus on what actually mattered. At first, loss feels like inconvenience. The absence is noticed in practical ways. Routines disrupted, habits broken, familiar support no longer available. But beneath that surface level discomfort, something deeper is happening. The mind starts replaying moments with new awareness. Conversations once dismissed as ordinary now feel significant. Gestures once overlooked now feel meaningful. Loss reframes memory. It turns small details into evidence of care that was present all along but never fully acknowledged. As clarity sharpens, comparison begins. Life without you is measured against life with you. And that comparison isn't theoretical, it's lived. They feel the difference in emotional weight, in stability, in peace. They recognize how often you were the grounding force, the consistent presence, the one who made uncertainty manageable. Loss exposes imbalance. It shows how much was being received versus how little was being protected. And that realization brings a level of clarity that presence never could. Loss also removes denial. While you were there, misunderstandings could be blamed on timing, stress, or circumstance. But once you're gone, those excuses lose credibility. The truth becomes simpler and harder to avoid. Choices are seen as choices, not accidents. Patterns are recognized as patterns, not isolated moments. Loss doesn't allow selective memory. It forces a full accounting of behavior, effort, and consequence. With clarity comes responsibility. They begin to understand where things shifted, where effort faded, where appreciation should have been shown instead of assumed. Loss highlights moments where different decisions could have changed the outcome. Not in a dramatic, regret-filled way at first, but in a quiet acknowledgement that something valuable was mishandled. Clarity is uncomfortable because it removes the ability to blame external factors. And the most defining aspect of clarity through loss is understanding timing. They realize that value isn't static. It exists within moments. Appreciation delayed becomes appreciation denied. Loss teaches that recognition has a window, and once it closes, understanding arrives too late to restore what was once available. Clarity gained through loss is honest, sharp, and irreversible because it is built on lived absence rather than imagined possibility. There is a difference between being unavailable and being unreachable, and that difference changes everything. Unavailable suggests circumstance, timing, distance, hesitation. It implies that access might return if conditions improve, but unreachable is a choice. It is the result of clarity, boundaries, and self-respect aligning. When you become unreachable, it's not because you disappeared, it's because you no longer occupy the same emotional location. The version of you they once had access to no longer exists in the same way. At first, they may misread this shift. They assume it's temporary, emotional, or reactionary. They believe silence can be broken, distance can be closed, and familiarity can be reactivated. But as time passes, they begin to sense something different. You're not responding the way you used to. You're not drawn into old patterns. Your energy feels steady, not defensive. Calm replaces urgency. And that calm signals something final. Not anger, not resentment, but resolution. Becoming unreachable happens gradually. It's built through moments where you choose not to explain, not to chase, not to re-enter conversations that cost you peace. You stop revisiting situations that already taught you their lesson. This isn't withdrawal, it's alignment. You recognize that access to you is not a right, but a privilege tied to respect, consistency, and effort. And once that realization settles, you stop making yourself emotionally accessible to environments that no longer meet you with the same care. What makes this shift powerful is that it doesn't require confrontation. You don't need to announce boundaries or justify distance. Your behavior communicates everything. You move differently. You prioritize differently. You respond with intention instead of reflex. The emotional door that once stayed open no matter what now has conditions. And when those conditions aren't met, the door doesn't slam, it simply remains closed. That quiet closure is what makes you unreachable. From their perspective, this is deeply unsettling. They're not being ignored, they're being outgrown. There's no conflict to resolve, no argument to win, no explanation to dismantle. They can't negotiate their way back into a space you no longer occupy. You're not withholding, you've relocated emotionally. And that relocation removes leverage because influence only exists where access remains. Unreachability also reflects inner peace. You're no longer driven by the need to be understood or validated by the same people who once misunderstood you. Your sense of self no longer depends on their recognition. That independence changes how you show up everywhere, not just in one relationship or situation. You become selective with your energy, intentional with your time, and grounded in your decisions. And that grounded presence creates distance from anything that threatens your balance. Over time, the realization settles in, you didn't leave to be chased, missed, or regretted. You left to protect what you were becoming. And once you cross that internal threshold, returning to old dynamics feels impossible, not because of pride, but because of growth. You are still visible, still living, still moving forward, but the version of you that once made access easy is no longer available to anyone who didn't value it when it was freely given. And that is the truth most people learn too late. Absence reveals, silence teaches, time clarifies, growth shifts power, loss sharpens vision, and self-respect draws the final line. You don't need to prove what you were worth. You don't need to explain what they lost. Life handles that part quietly. Some lessons don't arrive with closure. They arrive with distance. And by the time understanding reaches them, you're no longer standing in the place they remember. You're standing in who you became.